Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out to Precog time again. We're really happy to be here with Meena Hasan, who is an amazing artist and old friend, who I've known now for almost 10 years, which is bonkers, but true. I know, it's like wild. Um, Meena is a really accomplished painter, printmaker, thinker, and teacher, and she's most recently showed, I guess, at Launch F18 in New York, but has also done residencies at the American Academy in Rome, the center, and has shown at the Center for Book Arts, Zurcher Gallery, and the Stedelijk Museum, among many, many other places. And has taught at Rutgers and at RISD. So we're really excited to talk to her about what she's thinking about and making. And I guess, as always, we'll start out by asking, how is your quarantine, Meena? What's going on, or lack of quarantine? How are you easing into phase two?
um, it's been okay, actually. I'm really lucky because my studio is only like 6 blocks away, so I've been able to walk there and have pretty much been there every day since this whole thing started. Mostly just sitting and looking more so than actually doing anything. But that's been like super lovely. I had a home studio before that space, and I feel like Nassau Avenue has become much smaller, and I feel like I'm back in a home studio mode in a lot of ways, looking and thinking mostly. I've been going to protests. Last one was on Juneteenth, which was amazing. There was like a marching band involved, and the sight of live music like brought me immediately to tears. It was great. I didn't realize how much I needed it. It was really beautiful. And yeah, volunteering at food banks and trying to prepare for the semester, which is still somewhat of an abstraction to me, but we'll see.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and how have you been? I guess we'll sort of talk about what's happening in your studio a little bit later on, but how how are you thinking about textiles now, and how does it relate to like the broader idea of the textile in your work?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think I am shifting the way I'm thinking about it now, but it started definitely in response to many people in my life throughout, especially as a young art student. People basically demanding that I address my identity just because of my last name, which is one of the most common Islamic last names. And as like a New York born and raised, pretty privileged Bangladeshi American who was able to like travel back and forth, that was always a really uncomfortable thing to like speak to Bangladesh and Bangladeshis as a group. And it wasn't until it took me like a long time to locate textiles and patterning as kind of like the thing that's like part of my DNA no matter what. It was like definitely my personal art history for the first 10 years of my life, and the first visual language I kind of learned. And once I like accepted that whatever lower art form is part of my practice, it was like really liberating, and helped me kind of break a East and West binary and kind of like talk to that third space. I mean, especially like the history of textiles in South Asia is literally the history of globalism. So I feel very much like I share that history in a lot of ways, and it led me to like thinking of ideas of diaspora. It took me like forever to get to that word for some reason, and the way like cultural language is disseminated through trade and commerce, I guess, which I feel very much a product of also. I think like recently while I was at RISD, there are a lot of like people working in textiles at RISD and trying to like deconstruct the colonial gaze within the museum there, which was really exciting to see. And that kind of helped me articulate in maybe a more global politicized way beyond just like the personal investigation of the textiles I've had with me for 20 years or something. So I've been I went to the Victoria and Albert Museum for like the first time somehow 2 years ago in London. And that was like a really eye-opening experience. They have so much stuff from South Asia, and the text and the language around it is like really fucked up. And there are just like all these things that I had been kind of aware of that were stolen and housed in England. So now I'm kind of like looking at a lot of those specific kinds of textiles and trying to make my own iterations from a distance. Not like they're very open and playful for sure, but they start as an effort to reclaim that space, but on my own terms as a Bangladeshi American.
So this is the first image that you sent us, and it seems like a cool way of thinking about sort of like when I first was looking at these, I mean, obviously it's sort of really domestic and a pile of clothes, but also kind of points to like the ubiquity of fabric and the way that like what you were just talking about in terms of like the history of trade and commerce, or just these kind of inherent mashups can occur in really casual ways with textiles. So yeah, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how these sources kind of begin to make their way into your artwork.
Yeah. Each thing, they're usually, I think probably all the textiles I own were gifted to me. So even in this photo, that's like a Moroccan cushion that an artist gave me when I got married. Actually, these are a lot of wedding things. that striped red kurta is one of the kurtas that my family gave Cal's family. So all of these textiles, which I think, you know, many South Asians share, they like hold a lot of personal memory and significance within them, as well as they like become a way for heritage to be passed down beyond just like storytelling. And it's like a tactile way of like dealing with narrative, which I've always been really interested in. And this is like a really exciting moment that kind of like reaffirmed that interest. This is just like the chair that's by my bed that all my clothes end up piled on. And this is like a pile that was there for a while. On top of that is like a lungi, which is like the skirt that all the men wear in South Asia. That one of the ones that we gave Cal when we got married, that we keep trying to wear but not successfully wearing. I'm trying to get Cal to wear it regularly, but it's not happening yet. And then these are like some like neon green ASOS sweaters that I ordered like online. Really, they were like super on discount, and I just wanted green. I didn't have enough green clothing. And somehow I was making that drawing in the corner. I had started like 5 years ago or something. And then it became my like insomnia kind of drawing, and I just started layering it with colored pencils. And one morning, after maybe a week of working on it every night, I realized that like the color and the forms were kind of like completely parallel without me necessarily guiding it to that, but it definitely like influenced the way I was producing this, you know, still life drawing, which is really interesting, just to recognize how much they influence my ideas of color and texture and form.
Meena, can you talk about how you use paper in your work?
Yeah.
And it's all like in a sculptural way, you're working with it?
Yeah. I fell in love with this paper called Okawara, a Japanese paper. It's called Okawara paper. Actually, Ellen Gallagher, an interview with her, she was talking about, she uses it as well. And she was describing it as skin. And it really is like the most durable, amazing material that I've ever worked with. I treat it both as like paper to be drawn on. So it usually starts with when I'm working with that paper, I always start with like a quill, dip pen, kind of like scratched into ink drawing. That's like very, very permanent in a sense. And it feels a lot like tattooing the paper. The paper has like really, really thin layers and a lot of Kuzo like adhesive within it. So very much like skin. So like, you know, once you soak it through the first couple of layers, it sits the same way ink does under skin. I just got this stick and poke recently. I've been all about stick and pokes lately.
Show us again.
What is it, Meena?
It's a juggernaut. It's a tribal Hindu Bengali god. Where the word juggernaut comes from, and that, you know, yeah. So my left hand feels much more empowered, which is great. So yeah, the paper, it was amazing because it's so durable. So I could like crumple it up and dye it. I can use it. I can like practice textile techniques on it. But it also builds up to form in exciting ways. So those shoe pieces that Gabby was showing. Those started as like weird little studio secrets. They were kind of like my personal joke on cubism, I guess. I was doing like still life drawings of my shoes like from different angles, and then I would just like put them all together, and the ultimate form of the shoes is determined by like how those drawings ended up. And I was doing my shoes for a while, and they felt like little bits of, they felt like a embodiment of like the dry skin I might be leaving around or something, or like a skin I might have shed. So then I started, those are Katie's actually, who's here. So then I started asking friends. Katie and I shared a studio and making their shoes, which was really, really fun. And it's for like any group show I do, I always try to make all the people's shoes in the show. It's a nice way to commemorate the community or better understand people. You know, shoes reveal a lot about the way people walk and the way they carry their weight, and you know, how they want to express their identities through performance, I guess. This is like one of the first ones. I was thinking a lot about ocean creatures at this time, which is why I cut into it and kind of patterned out tentacles and whatnot. But yeah, I think like over time I've become more attached to kind of treating the clothing object as an object with integrity in and of itself, rather than trying to push it into a fantastical kind of realm. But I could totally see that coming back as well.
So that dovetails nicely into, I think, another major element of your work. Like on the one hand, there's a lot of plastic concern for surfaces and like the skin-like textures as you're talking about, and like almost this way that whether the paperwork is flat or formed, like it references the body either in its depiction or it's like or this kind of tactility. And I think on the other hand, there's like you have a really concerted and deliberate way of framing subjects as well. Like, so if the flip side of surface is perspective, right? Or how the space, perspective, composition, and how the space is organized. I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how you think about space in the work and how you see it integrating or not integrating with surface.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry. It's a big question.
We can just talk about space first.
No, exactly. Space is like, every painter's biggest question. What is the space in your painting, right? And definitely, I think, takes the longest to figure out. So I'm constantly like testing that space. I think like the way space manifests in my paintings is the thing that is maybe like the least controlled by me. It's kind of the thing I await to let like speak back to me and tell me about what I was thinking about. So I do definitely try to navigate like different ideas of perspectival space or flat space, and I definitely try to like have both of those in the same image if possible. But I do think ultimately it often goes to a flat space. I look at Persian miniature paintings a lot for the way they negotiate space in terms of like using color and pattern to navigate the boundaries between things. And I always had a really good time. I used to teach early childhood with studio in a school for about 5 years. And it was like so fun to talk about Persian miniatures with those kids, because they would talk about the sky as if it was a blanket or something. Like the way they understood space was so inherent to the way they saw, even though no one had taught them perspective necessarily. But they didn't like disavow the like power of the blue sky or something. It became it like the way they were talking about space really related to the way I was trying to describe space in the painting. Space is tactile, I guess, rather than allowing it to open up. I definitely try to like navigate the object image ratio in each painting pretty considerately. And I think that's kind of the thing that determines when something's done, when it's definitely an object with a little bit of image in it. So it's probably like a 60-40 ratio there. So like, yeah, this painting's a good one to talk about. So it's a very like compressed space that's like me holding my hand. The left side is my leg. And then there's a rug in the top left corner, which I was hoping I had painted with very like atmospheric kind of colors to kind of allow it to fall back into maybe like a foggy sky. And then the center, those like center circles that kind of run down, those like appeared out of the composition as I was making it. And that one teeny blue circle right at the center is like the first wash over the gesso. So there's always like I do hope that in terms of like the objecthood, I do hope that the paintings kind of like reveal their layers and reveal their making and are really self-aware in the fact that it's applied paint. But I do also hope that you can find moments of like real space that aren't necessarily defined by me, but still offer expansiveness or something. That one took me forever. This one's like so thick. It took me forever to get it to an object place, I guess because it's so much of the hand. But yeah, I was really trying to get the cosmos into my palm as much as possible. A yawn, a pre-sleep yawn.
It's really a particular point of view because like it at once makes the experience of the subject of the painting and the phenomenological experience of viewing the painting the same. And then simultaneously kind of, so there's this like strange superimposition of like what it means to stand in your place as a viewer. And then at the same time, like the sense of the body is totally fragmented and like kind of incoherent and becomes this like spatial, like patterned abstraction with like fleshy or hairy interjections.
Nice. You're so good, Gabby. Yeah, absolutely. Fragmentation is a big part of it. I feel, my identity is very fragmented, biographically speaking. So that kind of, a certain level of fragmentation is always definitely necessary in the painting. And yeah, I don't know. I think a lot about like mark making. I guess like each different move, each different approach to the mark I'm making reflects a different part of myself. So when I was talking about like the ink drawing before, that maybe reflects a desire for a more scientific gaze or an anthropological gaze, or like something that can speak to an idea of like truth or truth beyond like my own creation. There's something about a black line that like carries with it some sort of authority, as if it's like teaching you something. So I often like start by acknowledging that, and then try to use like paint to really complicate that relationship. And I think recently, like maybe in the last year, I've finally gotten to color a little bit. It's been taking a while. But I'm excited about how color is complicating my relationship to line, for sure.
Meena, can I ask you about film and how that influences how you're framing different, points of view in your work?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that filmic and photographic imaging is becoming like a vernacular in a way. So part of it is just acknowledging my own use of that vernacular. I watch a lot of TV, but I also like thinking about the cinematic image in terms of time, because it seems like it is inherently linked to an idea of linear time, in the sense of that there's a before and an after. But I'm really interested in trying to like complicate that close crop and kind of like fold that before and after inside of the crop itself. These three were like wet into wet, like 3-hour paintings from stills from Satyajit Ray's, who's a Bengali filmmaker. His film called Charlotta, which follows a woman named Charu in her house pre-partition in Kolkata, where my family originates from. And the story is based on a Rabindranath Tagore story. It's very nostalgic in a lot of ways, this film, and acknowledging the composition kind of helped me understand my own nostalgia for this time I've never even experienced. And it's a nostalgia that many South Asians have, that's really fascinating, that I've been also trying to figure out. But yeah, there are these 2 tracking shots in the film that are insane, where he's following her this close, right behind her head, as she's walking through her incredible house. And this one, there are moments where she looks down, she's reading. She starts to like read and educate herself, and falls in love with another guy. Anyway, it leads to all this stuff. So yeah, I was really like struck by those 2 scenes. And this scene as well. It's a total weird Fragonard enlightenment moment for On the Swing. And yeah, it led to my whole NAEP series, like doing this series. So I do think film is really important. I think also like using a filmic composition kind of like, raises an alarm for a lot of people when they see it, and it kind of can allow for an acceptable sense of artifice, like it's another way of being self-aware about constructing the image for me. It's my mom. This is the last one I made. Took forever. these guys are on, they're like 4.5 feet by 3 feet, so they're really big. And they're on Indian khadi cotton rag paper, so they're really, really thick cotton paper, kind of like blotter paper. And the paper is amazing because it forces me to really like work slowly. I tend to work really quickly, so I have to like build up to get to my level of texture and surface. And it starts with like a lot of stains, and I do give it a lot of time before I get to thick paint. And the other cool thing about the paper, which is really different than the Okawara paper, is that it's like layers and layers of cotton, so you can erase with it. You can like cut parts away and peel it away. So there's like a relief aspect to these works too. And I do hope that the compositions, like the fact that their shoulders are like pushing against the edges, that their head is just like cropped, I hope that the whole page can kind of like encompass their bodies in as much.
Meena, it makes me think a lot about like the idea of discomfort in looking at the work, you know, like the idea that we're not supposed to fall into the image, or that like the artwork isn't necessarily like a willing receptacle for our gaze or something like this. And like from like Western art history, like it makes me think of that really famous Lee Friedlander photograph with like the guy's shadow projected onto the back of that lady's head from the 70s. But obviously also like the relationship to like in a film, we don't have the same, because it's always moving, like we don't have the same sense of being blocked from an image. But with a painting, like our expectation is that it's available to us in a certain way. And I was wondering if you have, if you think about ideas about like comfort and discomfort, especially because like fabrics are often cozy, you know, like textiles are often about comfort.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm always trying to like heal myself through every work. But that doesn't necessarily mean I expect others to feel healed by them. And I do hope for like a certain level of discomfort. There's like, it feels so violent to represent a person. For me, it's really hard. And these pieces are like the closest I can get to portrait. I really wanted to try making portraits, and this is like what happened. And it became like a challenge to try to like, you know, put enough information about the people in their posture and what they're wearing and in their context to kind of like collapse the like third person perspective in a way, as in we can like see a little bit of what they're seeing, but we can't see all of it. And we can only see it through seeing them, is something I was really interested in doing. And I also, like, I just showed 4 of them for the first time. I hadn't shown more than 1 in one place. I showed 4 in the same place over the fall. And it was like, it was really intense to walk into a room and have everyone facing away from you. And I'm glad it worked. I had that feeling when I saw Roni Horn's show of the backs of birds' heads at Anton Kern, maybe like 20 years ago or something. And it was like this moment where even though I couldn't like exchange gazes with the subjects I was looking at, it made me like so much more aware of my own body in that space. So, you know, I've had people tell me that their like hair stands on end when they look at these, which is great. But you know, the nape as like as the space between the mind and the body also, like the really vulnerable space, even where like cats carry their kittens, or like where the Matrix, you know, puts their wires in. It's like this site of connection.
Caroline also wanted to know if the if you're thinking about Godard as well in the back of the head paintings.
Not directly, but I know Shijit Roy definitely thought about Godard a lot, so I'm not surprised. Yeah.
Um,
I love, yeah.
and we had a question a little while back from Nancy, which it seems would be a good a good transition or a good next question, which is how you're thinking about scale in the work between bodies which seem monumental or colossal and like the other like very tiny elements or like this kind of intricate network of built up marks that both create a surface and represent other surfaces, like the surfaces of other textiles.
Yeah. Scale is like definitely drives a lot of the work or like a lot of the decisions in the work. So I always try to like have like indexes of each shape or each mark in multiple scales. And that, in that sense, to me, that's like what world building means or something, instead of like creating like a illusionistic landscape or something. It's like if there's enough different micro macro scales that all can kind of inform and relate to each other, then it becomes like a whole universe. And it's also, you know, I'm also like really concerned with like how we as individuals negotiate ourselves and in relation to larger collectives of individuals, and how we can kind of like retain our specific distinctions while also gathering as groups. And you know, those ideas I definitely like enact through mark making in scale. So like there's something really funny to me about having a leg be the biggest thing and having you know, the sky be the smallest thing. Like I like trying to reverse those kinds of like expectations of scale, to kind of complicate interiority and exteriority as well. And I think about science and math a lot. I think about geometry and biology. So acknowledging like all the little bits that go into making the bigger whole is really important to me. But I also try to keep them all really distinct from each other, which is why they can kind of like sit within their own spaces when they need to, instead of just falling into a description of a space or something.
Meena, can we talk about how these pieces hang in the room?
Yeah. This is like what I've been thinking about a lot. I'm so excited about it. And it's like, you know, I've opened up a long line of inquiry and it's going to take me a while to figure out because I think I need a physicist or an engineer to help me. But I got climbing ropes. So those are like climbing ropes because they're non-static, so they don't like stretch too much. And then so I'll tie one side to the wall and then the other side is weighted down with water, with like a bucket of water.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about just like raising this piece through the weight of gravity that's like really, really exciting to me. And that like these pieces made me like nervous because I felt so out of nowhere compared to like my other works. And it wasn't until I installed them in a space that I understood that they were functioning in the same way in terms of like implicating the viewer and like being a three-dimensional object in your space, not just like image necessarily. And they kind of like build, like there are like little rooms behind them that get formed between them and the architecture of the spaces themselves, which was really exciting to me. So right now I have like a bunch going on a rope hung in my studio, and there's someone below me running some sort of giant machine every day. So they're literally like bouncing, they're like dancing all day long. It's so wonderful. And I'm trying to think about ways to, like, I want to like set one of these up where like the water bucket that's holding it up is actually like outside, so that when it rains is when the piece gets raised or something. Like, it'd be really cool to be able to like make the work even more reactive to their environment, or even like recording audio and playing it underneath them. It's just like really exciting to see them move suddenly.
Are these made of the same material that the shoes are made out of the other objects?
Yep.
Yeah.
Laura, yeah. And these, you know, the only thing I could do the first month was paint spirals. So I was just making all these little spirals, like invisible. They're just with like clear medium. And then I was just like soaking them in color and watching the color kind of dry and change from matter into space. And now I'm kind of working out how to put them together. It's still a question. This is like what my studio looks like.
Meena, when did you start painting plants?
What
month?
Yeah. I think it was last summer. I did a few gouaches, and then and then I went to Bangladesh this January. I feel so lucky to have done that trip when I did. And this is my roof there in Dhaka. And it's like one of the few houses from the 50s still left in the city. It's surrounded by skyscrapers. And it was built on, like, the whole area used to be a mango orchard or whatever, mango grove. And we still have 3 of those trees. So this is one of them. And I didn't really realize that like worshiping plants was an unusual thing until I took Cal here and talked to him about my relationship to that tree. I feel very close to that tree. It's full of crows, also, like the most intense crows ever. So yeah, I came back and did all of these like kind of close crops into the tree, thinking about the crows also, but thinking about like the history of the land that house is built on. I feel like, you know, my family is like super weird for not wanting to develop the house, and we're kind of like insistent on maintaining and preserving that history as much as possible. And part of that, a really big part of that history, are these giant old ass mango trees. And this painting, it's like 6 feet tall. It's you guys see it actually? It's like my Song of India plant that Romina Marriage gave me. And yeah, I've just been like like actually asking myself about all the houseplants that I've been accumulating, mostly through gifts. Again, everything I own is gifted. And it's really interesting to think about like the history of textiles and the history of plants are like so linked to me and very similar in terms of their like diasporic migrations. So that Song of India plant is like originates from like Madagascar, Mauritius, like the islands on the Indian Ocean. So it's like a really exciting moment of connecting to the African diaspora as well, which textile traditions do too, especially like if you think about batik, which is a like Indonesian technique that was adopted by the Dutch, that was adopted by South Asia, that was adopted by the British, that was then taken to Africa and is now like a symbol of all of these different cultures in different ways. So yeah, I've been thinking about the plants in that same way too, but the plants also have helped me think about my relationship to scale as well, in terms of like understanding geometric structures that are kind of like ever expanding and build in like, you know, crawling out of itself kind of thing. I've been, yeah, that's like the one thing I do every day, draw my plants at home, and just watching them grow has been a really magical I don't know if anybody else is having this experience, but I feel like all my plants have exploded in the last like 2 months, and it feels like they're doing it for me or something, which is really sweet. Yeah.
Meena, as you're talking now, like I think one of the things which is like really interesting to think about is that like the way you talk about the context surrounding your work are these like unvisualizable like global network structures, like structures of colonialism, like diaspora, these like trade routes, etc. And like often the work itself like focuses on a very specific thing or like functions almost like if we were to think of space as time, it is like the still frame of space or something like this, right? And like I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see this idea of like a close crop or the zoom in how you relate your artwork as maybe not examples, but expressions of a lot of these considerations, and how you think about these like larger networks, which are definitely visible, but like through their consequences and through like really massive kinds of structures.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like so massive, and we're all products of those global networks that it's like a difficult thing to try to critique without wanting to, you know, crawl into a hole and die. Like the like research part of my practice is definitely like the thing that pushes me forward and keeps me like learning. And it's not until like going to the Victoria and Albert that I could like locate some sort of actual argument I was making, you know, in terms of like ownership. But even that, like the way, you know, the post-colonial legacy in South Asia is like extremely complicated. We're like, you know, the siblings of England in a lot of ways, and they gave us, like, without the East India Company, the region wouldn't have been unified. They provided like all the infrastructure to kind of like navigate that region, as well as providing all of the education, right? So like there have been generations of people who have been educated by that system, and trying to like acknowledge that and be wary of that history while also moving forward and accepting it and transforming it is kind of like the goal with the work. So, you know, I pose questions instead of posing answers in the paintings, I think. And yeah, right now the questions are definitely directed at myself mostly. But yeah, it's been really fun to teach because I've had really, really good conversations. Like I've been like shocked when students understand what's happening. So that's like really comforting that others know those narratives as well, or feel those narratives too. I feel like I didn't answer a part of that.
No, I mean, it's really great to like listen to what you have to say about all of these things. We have a couple of questions that came in, so I'm gonna get into them now. And one of them comes from Mala, who wanted to ask, or who says, so many of these works are deeply from Meena's or a character's point of view. It's really evocative of how many of us are experiencing the world right now in isolation, in our own bubble, peering out from behind a mask, etc. So she wanted to know what you're making right now, or maybe like connecting the hanging works in your studio to some of the ideas Mala was bringing up.
Yeah. It's like interesting because I don't necessarily like somehow creating a first person perspective to me makes it a social painting, but I also understand, but maybe it's like um, talking to all the different people within yourself or something, which to me includes the people outside of me as well. God, losing my mind. But I guess like this quarantine kind of like reinforced that idea, I guess, that like even, you know, even on Zoom, while we're all trapped inside our little boxes, we can still connect kind of thing. Um, but I did have like really weird instincts in the last few months that I've never had before. Like I have like a really amazing view out my window. I'm in Greenpoint, and so like Manhattan and Queens kind of like hug Greenpoint, and somehow all the boroughs feel like they're in the same place. So I can see like Queens, Brooklyn, and Manhattan at the same time, and I've been making these like straight up sky cityscapes, which is like really crazy. I'm not going to show anybody them ever. But that it was like a really, that's like something I never thought I would be willing to do, to try to like create to represent the whole world in a panel, versus I guess like I could think of all the point of view paintings as like iterations of self-portraits in a way, for sure. But I do feel like it's expanding outward in a way that I don't understand yet, and it's exciting. Maybe I'll show them to you, Mala.
Andrea asked a question early on, which is when you're painting on flat surfaces, there's a play between perspectival form and the flatness of the patterns, shapes, and like the quality of the edges. Drea says she's really interested in the idea of tattooing, in quotes, as a mark that sinks in versus the paint that builds up. The tension between the two speaks to a spectrum of both surface and body. And like kind of a hypothetical question, which is what would the inside of these paintings look like in a certain sense? But so kind of thinking about this question of surface, but also the spectrum between the surface and the body.
Totally. Yeah, that's like the other really exciting thing that happened with those big hanging paper pieces, because I got to show the guts, like the backs of them, which kind of like reveal a lot of how they're made, and are much less cleaned up. But and yeah, there's like those paper pieces are like, I like the idea of something being able to disappear, or like I want the works to be both like aggressive and confrontational, but also really like shy and humble. And I'm always like trying to kind of like negotiate those two, and the flatness, both like literally in terms of like a sheet of paper hanging, right? If you approach it from the side, it doesn't even exist. But if you see it from another side, it's like a whole expanse. And I kind of like strive for that with the paint application as well, where like I feel like thinner washes or something become about light, or become like a source of light, whereas like thicker application becomes a way to like enter into like the viewer's space in a way. But, yeah. There was like a quote I read when we were in grad school. Elizabeth Murray described like cubism as a skirt you could jump into, which I like really loved the idea of, like a surface that you can like totally, you know, move into and become a part of in a way. So yeah, that's like what I strive for, I guess.
Meena, one thing that you brought up about one thing that you brought up in some of our conversations was the idea of the model minority, which is obviously like at least within your history, definitely an American concept of like a race or ethnic status inside of a majority culture. And I was wondering like if and how, like how that plays, how is that a part of the story for you?
Yeah, it's a big part of the story. I've been reading Vijay Prasad's The Karma of Brown Folk, which is in direct response to W.B. Du Bois' The Souls of Black Folk. And it's been like really helpful the first time I've kind of had language around this. And he kind of like makes a point that the Immigration Act of 1965, which invited South Asians to immigrate based on skill and like merit, kind of like set up this really problematic relationship to America for many South Asians, I think, where I think we were, like my parents are definitely, they immigrated in 75, so they're like a direct product of that. We were kind of like, came here as a solution for those in power, right? A way to like prove something about their racist attitudes or ideas of inclusivity or like globalism or whatever, in terms of like, like it can also definitely be thought of as like almost like a weapon against the African American community here. And I think it's like really important to kind of like acknowledge that history in order to like build solidarity right now, and create allyships across diasporas. But it's like a thing many people do not want to let go of, so it's really complicated. But I was like, I've been like highly educated my whole life, and the education was like my biggest source of trauma and problem. And like, I've been really trying to like take the last few months to, it's been forever, but really like thinking or trying to build language around that more directly the last few months. So I lived in Bangladesh for a couple of years when I was really, really young, and was in a British school system. I went to like an all-girls private school, which is going through a great crisis right now, thankfully. And then Oberlin, and then Yale, and it's like all of these places, I feel like I spend more time unlearning the things taught to me there than I do learning things there or something. And I definitely think that's like a product of my minority status. And it's also, a product of the private school I went to, I now know. But yeah, I think like Huma Baba was really helpful in my studio visit with her at Yale. She was like, with her piercing glares, I don't think she actually said anything. The look she gave me when I told her that I was like thinking about Rudyard Kipling's Just So stories, which it's like a children's book about these like creatures that are formed through these like really fucked up power dynamics. And it's like the book my mom read to me every night before I went to bed, and I thought it would be like, oh yes, this is my like scholarly reference. She was just like not having it. And that was like a big moment of realization in terms of like trying to like locate the people who taught me my histories and question the way in which they taught me those histories. Language is another way of thinking about this too. I consider myself like non-fluent in any language. When I've had many like English speakers think English is my second language, and every Bengali speaker think I don't know any Bengali. So I, have been kind of like consistently denied of fluency my whole life. And I think a lot of that stems from like a model minority idea. My parents deciding not to speak Bengali for a period of time when I was younger, because my school was pressuring them to like do whatever. Yeah, it's a lot of personal information, but I have so many friendly faces. I feel very comfortable.
No, I mean, yeah, we want to know.
Yeah.
Should we open it up? Do you think it's time, Gabby?
Yeah, I think it's time, unless, I'm gonna, so this is, I guess the official part of the talk is over, and I'm gonna make it possible for everyone to, oh, you're allowed to unmute yourselves now because I didn't check the right box, but please feel free to come join the conversation. I know most of us are friends, and those of us who don't know each other personally can also be friends. Cool. Thank you so much, Meena.
Thank you.
More conversation to come now. I'm like, go. No, I'm just kidding.
The Zoom silence.
Someone, Randy. I'm gonna call Randy out.
You're gonna call him Randy?
Yeah.
Randy, are you in Boston?
No.
No.
I'll unmute yourself.
I'm gonna unmute everyone, and you can remute yourselves if you want. All right, that's right. Okay.
Everyone? Okay, there we go.
Now.
Randy.
No, I am not in Boston. I just I moved to Minneapolis.
Cool.
So yeah. So I've been here for 2 years. Hi, Meena. So good to see you and hear your voice and hear all your thoughts about your work. And see what you're making lately.
Thanks.
Thanks for pouring out your deepest thoughts with all of us.
This is the problem with Zoom. I don't know, I'm talking to myself. Okay.
It's really nice to hear.
Oh, apparently there's a problem with the muting. Sorry, guys. I'll get on it. I'm trying to unmute everyone. But, yeah.
So, I have a question. Hi, Meena.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't know. Oh, hang on. Yeah, okay. You said you watch a lot of film and TV. What are you watching right now?
Right now I'm watching Penny Dreadful, City of Angels. Highly recommend. although it's about it's set in 1938 LA. Police violence against Mexicans basically, but it's well done, and I like the Penny Dreadfuls. But I was looking into it, and there isn't a single Mexican on the cast, I don't think. So anyway, maybe don't watch that. What am I watching? I have to watch Kiarostami. Gabby gave me that recommendation. I'm really I watched Chris Marker's La Jetée at the beginning. That was the first thing I watched, and was incredible. In terms of, I think it relates a lot to what we're talking about, about still imagery in relation to film and time. The fact that whole film is made through still images and is the most emotionally intense thing is really amazing. I like sci-fi. What did I watch? Yeah. The Expanse is really good too.
It's really good. I've seen it. It's so good. Thumbs up. What's happening?
I don't know. More questions. Manal, what are you watching?
Well, Caroline mentioned Godard. We watched Vivre sa vie yesterday, which was, I mean, beautifully shot. Horrible story, so depressing.
Yeah.
It's like, yikes. Violence against women, like, majorly. But that was really beautiful. And yeah, we were muted, but we were talking about like the frames of the backs of the heads that you're making, and there are some really beautiful shots that, you know, like were in conversation with that in that film. What else? We watched like a ton of Miyazaki in the beginning of quarantine. We watched, Caroline had never seen them, so
Like
we did a
Hayao
Miyazaki week.
And I realized, sorry to interrupt,
Animation.
but I also realized that a lot of my students were totally making Miyazaki fan art, and I didn't know. And I thought they were like being brilliant. And so I really, you know, now I have something to talk about with them to help them, I think, a little bit better. I thought they were just like kind of like visionaries. It was like very minor figures in Miyazaki that they were making like bodies of work around.
Oh.
So that's why it's important to watch that, I guess, for a lot of reasons, but that also, especially for teaching, if no one's dipped their toe. Yeah, sorry, Manal.
It's really weird hearing our echo in the other room. I should maybe just go in there.
I turned the volume down. Try to help.
I always like
Watch Rear Window. That was a good one for quarantine time.
What? I didn't hear you.
Which one?
Rear Window, Hitchcock.
Oh,
Very
yeah.
good one.
Rear Window? Oh,
Yeah.
for sure.
Anyway.
Meena, I was wondering if you could elaborate on like the worship of plants, and like is it specifically mango plants that are worshipped? I'm just like not familiar with like, you know, the tradition of that.
I don't know. This
Everything.
is like something I wrote in an email to Precog, and it's now a thing, which I'm I just realized that like pretty much every place I've been in, there's like a plant that I visit regularly that becomes like a place for me to be quiet and reflect or something. So that the roof, the mango tree in the roof is one place. I have a place in Manhattan. No, it got cut down. It's really sad. But that's, yeah,
No.
I don't go to Yorkville anymore. And then I was talking to Mala earlier about this pink Persian acacia mimosa silk tree with the little poof balls. I have one of those in our backyard that I spend probably 2 hours a day staring at. And it's like been trying to grow into our kitchen. Like every day there's a branch in our kitchen. It's crazy. It's growing so fast. But it's like it's been, I think like quarantine has helped articulate that it like kind of offers a time outside of time, you know, like it's a different way of understanding growth. You know, even though you can like so clearly see growth and development week to week, there's still this understanding that the plant might be there long after you're gone kind of thing. And I'm really interested in the way plants kind of like grow not linearly, but like build on themselves as they grow. So you can kind of like trace their histories in a really, really direct physical way on their forms, like a tree ring or something. I was like cleaning my palette knives off for the first time in like a year yesterday, and they're like super gunky, and I was like cutting away all the acrylic, and I was like, oh my god, I have a tree ring. It was like really clear. I have all these paint rings that I'm gonna do something with hopefully. But yeah.
Have you seen these photos of the Spanish opera just opened, and they gave a concert to plants, so the whole entire area is filled with plants? It's quite amazing.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a myth. That I think it is a myth that plants grow with music. They can hear. Apparently their roots can like sense running water. But like I don't know, there was like a book, I forget what the book was called, but it was like, and even I have a record that's like music for your plants. It's like
Oh, the
I think in the
Morse code
70s
record?
it was like a huge idea that like plants would grow with music. But
Well, they
I
do
think
emit their
okay.
own music too to attract insects. So that's interesting.
How?
It's like vibrate, like they essentially the vibrations they release into the air will change if they've been like harvested by a bee or another insect. So
Oh,
like
nice.
other insects will know if they've like already collected the pollen or not.
Cool. That's really cool. That just like it's really
Anyway.
really Tammy also thinks it's cool.
I recommend, there's this really short story by this woman named Rakaya Sultana from 1908, I think. And I mean, I think it's the first sci-fi story maybe ever written. But it's all about this town or village, maybe, imaginary village of only women who are like living in companionship with their plants and have a very like fluid kind of relationship where they feed each other and protect each other. And then like this other town of men tries to invade and they use like the power of their plants and the sun to protect themselves. It's a really great, it's like super short story.
Well, what is it
Yeah,
called?
Sultana's Dream. Here, I'll type it in the chat. That kind of like, you know, that story, I mean, I think there's like a lot of connection between plant life and like botany and textiles, even in terms like the tree of life pattern, for example, changed a lot through colonial influence in terms of like including like a scientific description of each stage of the plant's growth within its representation, which is like really fascinating to think about. Yeah.